Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today guys, we have a book review. Sorry everyone, I had to go lock my cats back in the closet. I really only take them out of the closet when I want to post pictures of them on Facebook. But today guys, the book in specific that we I honestly have no clue how he got out. But anyways guys, today the book that we will be reviewing is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. This is the third book in the Red Rising series and is the conclusion of the first trilogy, the first story in this series. So, if you wanted to, you could read Morning Star and then finish your reading of the Red Rising saga there, because it does sort of have a ending to it to where you wouldn't have to continue with the other books. But I definitely see myself reading those in the future. So I really enjoy what Pierce Brown has done so far in this world. So, but without further ado, let's get into Morning Star. Like the tradition is usually on this channel, we're going to be talking about what I liked about Morningstar first. And if you've watched my other reviews for the Red Rising books, my praises for those also include Morningstar as well. The pacing is fast paced and electric. The pacing is a bit slower in this book, but I actually like it more. It gives us time to sort of settle down and really like explore some things, which sort of to piggyback off that, one thing I really did enjoy about the story is we get even more look into the world of this future Milky Way solar system that Pierce Brown has us his characters set in. For example, my two favorite parts about this book really would be probably when we get to see the Obsidians. So we have our small cast of characters go to the South Pole on Mars, which is where they like sort of like train the Obsidians to be like brutal killers or whatever, like the bodyguards of the Golds basically. And there's very heavily inspired by Vulking Viking culture, or Volking if you want to shorten it, or okay, anyways. um yeah, so we have like the Valkyrie, who are female Obsidians, who are like the high class warriors, and then we have the Queen of the Obsidians, and we have um the tower in the sky that the Golds rule from, and they sort of convince the Obsidians that they are gods because the Obsidians don't have the level of technology that the Golds do. um so they're able to perpetuate this idea that they are godly figures. That is until Darrow shows up, of course. But well, Darrow and Mustang. But I really enjoyed us getting to just like pick a part of this universe and really like step into what their life is like on a day to day basis. And we get to even see like special creatures that the Golds crafted so the Obsidians can't leave their like Antarctic ice igloo that they live on, which I really love that as well. A nice touch of world building that made sense in the world. It wasn't just to be cool or whatever. And then my next favorite part of this book is going to be when the gang goes to, I think it's Io or Ganymede. It's one of the moons on one of the gas giants. I think it's one of the moons of Jupiter, and we get to meet with one of the highest ranking golds in the Outer Rim community. And I really liked this interaction that we get to see, or this like exploration of this side of the Golds, because Pierce Brown shows us there is really two different, even within the Golds, there's factions and cliques or whatever. Cliques is probably not the right word because it's grander than that, but we get to see that the Golds in the Outer Rim, they're very much far removed from the politics and the schemings of the Inner Golds that are around like Mars and Earth and near the core. Um, and we get to see that these Golds value like honor and courage, and they're called Iron Golds, which is basically like they pride themselves on having the moral code and ethics that the first Golds had when they took over the world, or the universe, not just one world. And we get to, I forget the character's name, but he was super cool to, as sort of like, he was the character of what Outer Rim Golds are, and so we get to see again another layer of this world building that is, of course, going to have consequences in the future of the series, but most certainly had consequences on some of the decisions that are made in this book. So that was also, I love that the world building was really on par for Morningstar. That's really where Pierce Brown shined in this one. The highs of this book are incredibly high, of course, and like a third book in a series should be, they are the highest of the series. We have super cool, epic moments. We have great grand scale, space battles. We have, character revenge arcs that we've been waiting for. We have character conclusions that are, for the most part, satisfying. So the character work was good. The writing, I think, has got a little bit better. Again, I think there is some parts of this book that they feel out of place because Pierce Brown really gets flowery with his like introspection of his characters and how he sort of uses metaphor and simile to describe how his characters feel in the moment. And they're nice, but it does feel a little disconnected to like his usual like simpler prose style. And um, not to say that those moments aren't some of the most quotable of the series. I just they throw me off a little bit when they come up because it sort of isn't in the flow with his usual style. Um, and I'm not sure if that's him just trying to flex his like writing muscle, like, hey guys, like, yeah, I can write like that as well, or if, I don't know. But I mean, other than that, the writing is great. His writing has definitely gotten better since the first two books, I would say. Not by like a grand margin, but you definitely see improvement in his style. I did read a critique online because I do like to look at the low reviews of books that I enjoy just to see, what maybe other people are thinking, why they perceive this book as not being as standing up as well as I believe it does. And one critique I saw was that these Red Rising books follow like a very strict structure that makes it super repetitive. And for example, I think the reviewer said something like, bad thing happens. We go to a place. Darrow comes up with an incredible scheme. They solve it. Bad thing happens, and that wasn't really something I picked up on until it was pointed out to me. So maybe that's in favor of Pierce Brown. That it wasn't really something that I picked up on necessarily. Um, but even if it does follow that sort of formula and format, I think it would be hard to find stories that don't follow some sort of plot structure. I think it's what you do in that structure that matters. How you subvert expectations, how you introduce something new to the genre or interesting, or something that is a spectacle for the reader to experience. And no one's better at spectacle than Pierce Brown, from what I've read so far. Maybe Robert Jordan, but yeah, so maybe there is a structure there, but I don't think it detracts from the writing or the story at all. I mean, this is really a great, well structured, plot story here. Now to address some of the things I didn't like about Morningstar, I think there was two instances of character work and scene work that didn't really work well for me. I felt like hiccups in the story, or I don't know. I didn't really like the decisions that were made to include these scene and character work in the story. Specifically, one is with the jackal. There's a scene in this book where the jackal sort of like throws a hissy fit like a little baby man child, and because with a conversation that he's having like over FaceTime with Darrow and Mustang. And the reason that I didn't really like this sort of like visceral reaction from the Mustang from the jackal was, up until this point in the series, the appeal of the Jackal or Adrius has been his sort of cold, calculating, hedonistic approach to how he lives. Right? He doesn't really have an empathy function in his body. So if we're thinking like Inside Out with all the emotions, he doesn't have empathy. That doesn't exist. And this makes him sort of terrifying because he's going to do what puts him in the best position possible, and he like does anything to do it. He doesn't really care by what means he has to. And this sort of makes him scary. We can make the comparison to like Gustavo Fring from Breaking Bad. My girlfriend's been rewatching Breaking Bad recently, and the reason Gustavo Fring works so well as a villain is he's the same way, right? It's like he doesn't make threats; he makes promises. Like he will actually do this stuff. He's not playing around, and he's smart about it too. He's very intelligent, so you're not going to be able to get over on him, right? And that was the Jackal for me in Red Rising and Golden Sun. I mean, heaven forbid in Red Rising he ate one of his teammates in the Institute, uh, just to have a chance to win the whole Hunger Games thing. So he really doesn't care. He'll do anything to put himself in the best position. But while doing that, it's like he didn't do it for like it was just I'm doing this because I it puts me in the best position possible. Like it's just a logical thing to do. It wasn't like emotion driven. He didn't really show emotion in the first two books. Um, on occasion, I guess he'd throw a joke every now and then, maybe when Darrow and him meet up in Golden Sun to talk about their agreement. But like that's another example. He aligns Darrow with himself, just to use Darrow sort of as a tool to put himself in a higher position. Um, but then we get this scene where he's like, like lashing out and like screaming, and it just I don't know, it made him feel less threatening to me as a villain because it's like, oh, like I seeing that part of him makes him less scary. I was like, oh yeah, he is just like a 23 year old, privileged kid who is, just a terrible human being. I always thought he was a terrible human being, but you know what I'm saying there. We see this human side of him, and it makes him less scary, right? Because the whole scary part of him was that he didn't have much humanity to him. But then you give this scene to him, which gives him humanity, and it just makes him less of like a hyped up villain, in my opinion. Another scene in particular that um, to be completely transparent, I found hard to take serious was a intimate scene between Darrow and Mustang, where Mustang's just like repeatedly telling him like it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. All this people have died and this terrible stuff is happening. It's not your fault. And I've seen people do this approach in media before, but honestly, Goodwill Hunting did it the best. And I just feel like every time I see that it's not your fault, it's not your fault thing after that movie, it just feels cheesy to me. And so Darrow finally cries in this moment when he's been trying to hold back tears this whole book, which is great because you want to keep your characters from crying as much as you can. So when they do, it has more of an impact. But I just wish Mustang didn't do the whole "it's not your fault" thing because then it's just like I don't know. It just feels too cheesy in that moment. Maybe you could argue this whole book is cheesy, which that's a fair argument, but just that seems specific. I think it was just a little over. A good amount of cheese is good, right? But just don't do it too much. Don't go over with it. And I think this scene kind of did. It didn't work well for me. Also, another minor nitpick is someone snorts contemptuously, and then I think like maybe a half page later or a page later, someone snorts contemptuously again or contemptuously. And I was like, where's the editor on this one, guys? Like, we're gonna let him use snorts contemptuously, like in the same chapter. Overall, guys, to wrap up this video, I really did love Morning Star, and I've been thinking the past day, debating over if it's my favorite in the series. And I would like to say it is. I think some of the lows in this book, the lows of Morning Star, I think might be a tad bit lower than the lows of Golden Sun, only because of the two instances of the Mustang thing and the Jackal thing. Kind of what diminishes this book for me a little bit. But I think the highs are just too great. I mean, there's so many epic moments. We get a nice little conclusion at the end. I think Morning Star, because sticking the landing is a hard thing to do, of course, with a series. But Morning Star's scale and the epicness, I think it's hard to top that. I think Morning Star might have to be my favorite, but again, with all these books, even Red Rising, the first book, they're only fractionally better than each other because all of them are great, right? Who I would recommend this book to, if you're a fan of Star Wars and like the Star Wars universe, I would have to recommend Morning Star. I mean, I really, while reading this book, and I talked to one of my friends on Instagram, that it does. I think this series will do so well as like a TV show or a movie because it really does have that Star Wars appeal, right? It's soft sci-fi. We have grandiose characters, making big plays. We're fighting a rebellion, just like Star Wars. So I think if you're a Star Wars fan, I would definitely have to give this book a read. And it's very accessible books as well. The prose, the style is not hard to get into. Um, I think sci-fi fans in general would also enjoy this book. Maybe if you're more of a hard sci-fi guy and you're more fan of the denser works of science fiction, maybe pass this one up because it's very soft and the writing isn't poetic. But I think the writing is really great. I mean, I think Pierce Brown does a great job with Darrow as a first-person point of view character telling the story. The way he does it is, phenomenal. His introspection with the character is also great. Makes the human character feel really human. I think I say this a lot, but I think Sanderson also fans would all like this book. But more generally, if you're a fan of like the hopeful endings, right? I think Morningstar is or Red Rising in general is a good series to read, right? Because Golden Sun is the Empire Strikes Back of this book, so you're gonna finish that one and be pretty upset if you're looking for a hopeful read. But by the end of Morning Star, we have a pretty hopeful, outlook on the future. If you're into the happy endings, this is a relatively happy ending. I'm not sure how I feel about. Okay, spoiler alert, even though I've done spoilers in this video up to this point, but Darrow and Mustang secretly had a kid while he was like trapped in the Jackal's box. Um, I'm not sure how I felt about the "you had a kid, here's your kid" trope. I liked it in the Black Panther movie, the recent one they released, where we get to see T'Challa's son. This one, it's always like nice, maybe a little bit too cheesy though, like I was mentioning, either maybe a little bit too cheesy. But honestly, in this instance, it does make sense for him not to know about the kid until he does. That's a perfectly reasonable reasoning behind the character for not telling him. But overall, guys, Morning Stars, Pierce Brown really does stick the landing here. He does a great job with this book. If you love the first two books, I'd find it hard not to find, or at least thoroughly enjoying this book as you finish the series. And you don't have to continue after this book. You could stop after Morning Star, and that's sort of a completed story. But I do plan to continue on to Iron Gold and the rest of the books in this series, and then maybe I can catch up before Red God comes out. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video next Sunday.